Hello, and welcome to this video in the series. Let's consider a different subject for now. Another aspect of this life about which there's rightful concern is the fact that there may be times in our lives when we feel overwhelmed by some of the dark times that may come and by the feelings that we may experience at such times. For some persons, the difficulty of experiencing and dealing with such things seems greater than it does for others. There can be feelings of loneliness or inner emptiness that we may all experience at times. These can often be helped by the knowledge that although we may at times feel lonely, we're never really alone. We all have unseen guides that are always there. These guides, sometimes called guardians, are constantly working with our own higher self to guide and watch over us throughout our lives. We will discuss these guides somewhat more at length when we talk about the subject of angels in a later video. But the knowledge that we're never alone, however, should provide a great deal of comfort and reassurance to those who may be particularly troubled. In addition, it should also be pointed out that the feeling of inner emptiness can begin to be filled when we open our minds and our hearts more and more to truth and spiritual light and invite both in. Our awareness that we're on a very special journey as seekers on the path can also go a long way toward leaving behind any feelings of emptiness or loneliness. We must not forget, however, that meeting, overcoming, and mastering the difficulties and problems of this life, and thereby learning the lessons associated with those problems, are the reasons why we have chosen to come here and incarnate on this physical plane. It's extremely tragic, therefore, that there are some who, when beset by such difficulties, feel unable to cope and as a result make the decision to take their own lives. In many instances, they do this because they do not realize two important facts. First, we will never be given problems that are more difficult than we have the capability to handle. The difficulty at times may be very great, but we're assured that it will never be beyond our ability to deal with it. Those things which may seem to shake the very foundation of our world at the time that they're happening are very often the same events about which we may reminisce years later with a trace of a smile when we recall how devastating they seemed back then. Time can be a great healer. The second point is that taking one's own life means that the problems which brought about that have not yet been overcome, much less mastered, and the needed lessons therefore have not been adequately learned. This in turn means that the higher self will eventually have to make the choice to reincarnate here and once again meet those same problems in a different life. This will continue to happen over and over again if necessary, until those problems have been resolved properly, and we have not simply run away from the problems without making a proper resolution. There are additional difficulties, at least some of which will be karmic, that can be brought about by the willful taking of a life, even one's own, and these must also be considered. Taking one's own life simply forces us to endure those same difficult problems over and over again, lifetime after lifetime, until we face them and overcome them properly. As you can see, therefore, taking one's own life solves nothing and saves us from nothing. It should also be stated at this time, however, that the speaker readily acknowledges the fact that there are persons who have taken their own lives because of their inability to think through difficulties as clearly as they might normally, due to a chemical imbalance in their brain that may have been brought about by bringing drugs, even prescription medication, and or alcohol into their body in such a way and at such a time that these substances bring about or contribute to bringing about the creation of such chemical imbalance. Even in such cases, however, it's the speaker's feeling that it would be exceedingly rare if such decisions, which would lead to the imbalance, made by the individual involved, were made despite input from or the strong influence of the higher self. We are agents of free will, however, and perhaps such a person may, despite all the efforts of the higher self, succeed in carrying out the decisions leading to the chemical imbalance and the subsequent decision to take one's life, or to the subsequent events that cause one's life to be lost as a result of the imbalance. Even with these things considered, however, it should still be pointed out that the additional karmic difficulties that can be brought about by the taking of a life, even one's own, or perhaps especially one's own, should also always be taken into careful consideration by those persons who may be thinking that suicide could be a way out, when in fact it causes those problems and events to be replayed and relived in a future life. As stated earlier, it solves nothing and saves us from nothing. I believe very strongly and can state with certainty that there really is hope for all of us in this life. I also realize, however, that life can be extremely difficult at times. We're all struggling in one way or another, but that's not really as bad as it sounds, because as I mentioned previously, one of the very important reasons that we choose to come here and reincarnate on this planet in the first place is so we can experience this life with the parts of it that are good and the parts of it that seem not to be good. The reason for this is that we cannot learn the lessons that life here has to offer if we never experience any adversity. Experiencing, overcoming, and mastering life's difficulties are the ways that we learn the lessons that this life makes available to us. These are the lessons that we reincarnate here to learn. If life were only smooth sailing with no adversity, how could we ever learn even to appreciate the calm that follows a storm? Without the storms, how could we learn the lessons that are available for learning only when the storms come? We, on a higher level, our spirit, chooses to come here just so we can learn these lessons of this life. And thankfully, if we miss a few this time around, we are generally given another chance, and we can choose to return here in order to try again. Some at a conscious level may use this as an excuse to do nothing, because they may therefore feel that they can always make up for it in some future incarnation. This, however, is very dangerous thinking. If one continues to think that way in each life, the journey back to God can never be completed because it's never really begun. What a terrible waste and loss for the one who would make such a choice. When we meet, overcome, and master difficulties in this life, and thereby learn the lessons associated with those experiences, we cannot help but have our lives change for the better. Although it's well known that these changes seldom happen over a short period of time, nevertheless, positive changes do begin to take place in our lives, and with a good heart, perhaps a good book appropriate to our place on the path, and a prayer on bended knee with bowed head, and when needed, even the unseen help that comes from higher positive forces, we can make it through even the most difficult of times. There is at least one thing that we can hold on to and remember during those times when our problems seem to be so many and so difficult to overcome. That is the fact that by overcoming and mastering these problems, we are accomplishing those tasks which we have come here to accomplish. The problems that are often associated with getting an education, getting a job, entering into marriage, bringing up children, coping with later life, etc., and the important responsibilities that are associated with each of these phases of our lives are all simply helpful tools and vehicles, learning tools, so to speak. Now, that's not meant to imply that they are unimportant, however, because the opposite is true, but they're there to help us accomplish the deeper reason why we're here, that of learning those needed lessons that this life has to offer. For those few seekers who finally make the decision to dedicate themselves to living a life of service to God, and thereby to one degree or another to their fellow man, they find that this decision often brings about great changes in their lives. For many of these persons, it comes as quite a surprise to find that many of the changes that come are not necessarily pleasant to experience. They may have even expected that the opposite would be true. They are not aware of the fact that once we have in some way given ourselves or dedicated ourselves to a life of service to higher positive forces, it can bring about that kind of change in our lives. From a so-called Western perspective, for example, when we ask God or the Christ to come into our lives and take us and make us what He would have us be, the changes that come can sometimes, relatively speaking, seem somewhat sudden and often unexpected. It's not a casual thing to give yourself in dedication to God in such a way. It is a very serious matter. God is not some anthropomorphic or human-like being who arbitrarily interferes in our lives for His own purposes. God has set up the law of cause and effect, often called the law of karma. This is the same law that says, as you sow, so shall you reap. And He normally never interferes in the individual lives of humankind unless, and this is a very important unless, a person asks God or the Christ to come into their life, take them, mold them, make them what He wants them to be, and use them in His service as He will. This must never be done as a thoughtless, casual act. It will change your life. If you make that decision and then ask that important question in the manner indicated and you truly mean it, then God can and will, either Himself or through His agents, come into your life and work with you for that purpose. The changes that come will ultimately be for the better, but for some it may not seem like it at first, however, because, depending upon your own situation and where you are on the path and your life experiences, it could continue to bring changes into your life for years. The reason for this is because when God or His higher positive forces begin to prepare us for a life of service, one of the things that is usually done is to clear the slate, so to speak, where our karmic debts are concerned. This allows us to serve unencumbered by that karmic burden. Depending on what we have on our karmic slate, so to speak, to be worked through, in other words, things can become very difficult at times, even though God or those higher forces working with you as His agents to properly resolve these matters will usually try to be as gentle as possible. It's important to note that we should try to learn as much as we can from all that happens to us at such times. Some people have said that their lives almost seem to be turned upside down for a time, while others have not found it to be quite so difficult in that way. It depends upon what karmic debts each person may have. If this is something that you believe you should make the decision to do, or if you have in fact done this, then you can now have a better understanding of these things. Do not forget that patience and prayer and a good heart will be of significant help in seeing you through your difficult times. Once again, it should be restated that one of the most important reasons that we reincarnate on this earth is to experience life's problems, overcome life's problems, master life's problems, and thereby, during that process, learn the lessons and master the lessons that are associated with those problems. This is why we continue to decide to return here time after time until we accomplish these important goals. As I have tried to make plain here, this is not easy. It's for this reason that I usually recommend to people that they pray often, especially during difficult times. Pray that you will learn all that you need to learn from those things which happen to you. Pray that you will be guided and strengthened to approach and deal with these problems in accordance with the will of your guide, probably your higher self. Or pray to God to guide you to approach and deal with the problems in accordance with His will, if you prefer. You should also resolve and pray to do all that you can do, and to do the best that you can do when working through these times that bring life difficulties. When you pray about these difficulties, it's important to always try to pray for greater strength and not for fewer problems. Finally, try to approach life with a good heart, meaning with a heart that's looking more and more towards service and less towards self, with malice toward none, as well as trying to be a person who always does his or her best to do the right thing when dealing with others. If you do your best to do all these things, and do your best to think or do no ill toward any other, and do the best you can to approach others with an attitude of tolerance, compassion, and universal love. In other words, try to be as blameless as possible by always taking the high road and trying to do the right thing toward the other person. Then I do not believe that you can possibly help but derive very great benefit. All of these problems that you deal with successfully and master in this life are problems that are then behind you, and they will therefore not be waiting for you in the future, either in this life or some subsequent lifetime. Or if they should be present, you are extremely unlikely to have difficulty dealing with them. No one should expect to attain all of these goals overnight. But there's no doubt that they're extremely worthwhile goals, and by continuing to seek and to live a life of service, meaning less and less for self and more to serve, then we're creating a better future for ourselves and for our world. If you're already doing all of these things, then you're making a great deal more progress than you know in getting life's difficulties behind you and in accomplishing the goals, whatever they may be, that you have come here to accomplish in this life. Family relationships are another subject for consideration here. When we talk about life difficulties, some of the most common problems that many people deal with in this life are as a result of their interactions with members of their own families, especially those involving parent-child relationships. Remember that we each choose our parents. The higher part of us, our higher self, does so before we are even born. The parents that we choose are chosen because that higher aspect of ourselves knows that these specific relationships are needed. Perhaps it's because we've not been able to resolve problems and difficulties with them in a previous life, so that part of us, that higher aspect of ourselves, chose them to be our parents in this life so that we would have another opportunity to try to work out resolutions for the problems and difficulties with them that we have not previously been able to resolve. Remember that they must also agree on that same higher level of consciousness to be your parents, our parents. They probably at that same higher level wanted the opportunity to have another chance to work things out also. I don't recommend that anyone talk to their parents or to others in their family or even to friends about such matters, however, because on a conscious level most people have no knowledge of such things, and they might easily become upset and or misunderstand, which could create even more problems. This information is being given to you so that you might have a greater understanding of such matters and therefore be able to deal with family and others more wisely. Since you're now beginning to have a better understanding of such matters, if there are such difficulties with your family, it will be to your benefit to be ready to do whatever is reasonable to quietly resolve these problems that you may have with your parents or with other family members when an appropriate opportunity presents itself. Depending on the nature of the problem, it may be very helpful to take small steps in the direction of a resolution, and over a period of time, work until a satisfactory resolution reaches its final solution reaches its until the solution reaches its final conclusion, rather than trying to resolve the problem in a single period of discussion. The problem at issue may have taken days, weeks, or even months to reach the stage of difficulty where it now resides, and it would not always be wise to insist that it must be resolved at once. Sometimes these problems cannot be easily resolved. In some instances, we cannot resolve them in this life at all, but one should do everything that one can to be at least as blameless as possible in all such matters. It would also be worthwhile for you to keep in mind one additional piece of very important information, and that is the fact that when differences occur between people who care for each other, family members meaning and others to whom we feel close, you might be surprised to find that the higher selves of the people involved are often working together in cooperation to bring about the circumstances needed to allow both or all parties to have an opportunity to resolve the difference or differences in the proper way so that both or all parties concerned can overcome and hopefully master the problem, learn the lesson, and put it all behind them. When such resolutions do not take place even though opportunity was provided by the higher selves, then they, the higher selves, will continue to work together to try to continue to give the parties involved ample additional opportunities at various times to find the correct solution that they, the higher selves of those involved, know is needed for the sake of both or all parties concerned. This kind of cooperation by the higher selves is not at all uncommon, especially between spouses, and those involved are very seldom aware of it on a conscious level. By taking the time to stop and think about the fact that such a thing could be happening to you when you're having the kind of disagreement described, you may very well be able to overcome the almost instinctive urge to insist on having the matter resolved in your favor, and instead have it resolved in a spirit of cooperation and of doing the right thing toward the other person or persons. The latter kind of resolution, when it's come from the heart, is virtually always the best by far, and it generally makes it unnecessary to continue to revisit the same problem over and over again within the same incarnation or in subsequent incarnations. One thing that you can do to try to overcome these kinds of problems is to try to find forgiveness in your heart for your parents, or in fact for anyone, if you feel that they have wronged you in any way. You should make the effort to be the best son or daughter that you know how to be. Make the effort to have better thoughts toward them. Speak kinder words to them and about them. Make the effort to realize and remember that your higher self chose them as your parents, and that it doesn't make sense, that it does not make such choices without good reason. You should realize that though without these people as your parents, you would not be and could not be the person that you are today, because the person you are today was determined in part by these parents and your association with them as you were growing up. The same can be said for the relationships and the difficulties that you experienced throughout your life. All of these things have played a part in helping you to determine the person you are today, and you could not have become the person that you are now without the contribution that all of these factors together have made. There may be times, depending on the needs of the personalities involved, when parents and children may decide to reverse their roles for a particular incarnation. They make that decision, of course, at a higher level. Whether or not your parents in this life will be your parents in the next life will be decided by your higher self and their higher selves, depending on how well all of you have done in living as parents and children, and how well you were all able to resolve the problems and difficulties that you encountered in this lifetime. As stated, it is even possible that you could be the parent and they could be the child or children in a future life, in order to help you both see things from each other's point of view. If you can deal with these difficulties in such a way that you remain as blameless as possible, meaning that you try always to do the right thing in your dealings with others, from a cosmic point of view, you may then be able to successfully complete your portion of the karmic interplay with them. If they are not blameless, then they may need to go through these same difficulties in a subsequent lifetime, but it's likely to be with someone else if you were able to successfully deal with your part of it. There are many possibilities. There's not much that anyone can accomplish by worrying about such matters. You would be far better off instead to use your energy to try to do the best that you can in the situations you encounter each day. You will find that to be far more productive than worrying. There may be situations that have occurred in your relationship at one time or another that have caused feelings of regret on your part, especially if you realize that perhaps you may not have done the best that you could at some of those times. Believe me when I say that you are not the only one who has had such feelings or who has made unwise decisions in relationships with others. Almost everyone has had similar feelings and experiences. Simply try to do the best that you can do to be as blameless as possible. In other words, as previously indicated, always try to do the right thing toward the other person in each situation. Despite your efforts, these situations may not always work out the way you hope they will, but you should try to always do your best in matters of this kind. When we choose unwisely, and we all do at times, we should learn from those situations all that we can, correct them if it's possible and reasonable to do so, and then move on. Continuing to dwell on past mistakes is not a particularly worthwhile way to spend one's time. While we're on this subject, however, please allow me to suggest that in addition to trying to be the best son or daughter that you can be to your parents, that you also try to be the best brother or sister that you can be to your siblings, the best father or mother that you can be to your own child or children, and the best husband or wife that you can be to your spouse. All of these are important, but the latter is more so today than ever, considering the rate at which couples are separating from and even divorcing each other. If you try to do the best that you can to follow these suggestions for your parents and your siblings, and then take the same approach with your child or children and your spouse, and frankly, why not to everyone with whom you have contact, then no one should ask more of you than that. Remember, however, that trying always to approach others in this manner can at times be extremely difficult, if not almost impossible, and one does not succeed every time one tries. But trying your best can help to make you a better, more understanding person in your dealings with others, and I can assure you that your sincere efforts will be noted and well received by those higher forces who are always aware of such things. Who knows? Perhaps others with whom you come into contact will observe and follow your good example. Our world would certainly become a much better place. I want to thank you now for watching. I now invite you to watch the next video in this series. Again, my sincere thanks.